Welcome back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Goldcamp, here with my co-host, Blake Alderman. Blake, it's been a little while since we've shot a show. I know I was in the middle of moving to an apartment, so I had to get set up and everything. It took a while. We were hoping to get Jacob on the show to talk some of the recent developments. He's actually on his way down to Fort Lauderdale today to meet with Billy Napier before he speaks to one of the Gator clubs down there. So we should have some awesome content from the site coming up from Jacob on Billy Napier, sort of how things are going this spring. But Blake, I wanted to get you on the show because Florida's had a lot of developments in recruiting in the last couple weeks, and we've talked about for the last few months how there hadn't been a whole lot of movement in the 2023 class. Well, now, as we sort of anticipated, as you get into the month of May, as the month of June and July approach, you're going to see some movement. So first and foremost, Florida has landed 3 commitments. Let's just kind of go through and talk about each of those, perhaps starting with offensive lineman Nigel Harris. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, he's a guy that has played and started at IMG Academy, which is full of, blue chip top recruits, you name it. He's been a starter at the offensive line position at the guard spot since his freshman year, or at least was getting a lot of play. Since then he's got a lot of starts there. He's a guy that is an interior guy. Obviously he's going to be, a guard at the next level, could be someone that maybe plays some center as well. But I think guard is probably where he's at that next level. That's where Florida has liked him at as well. Big body guy, can really get out in space and, kind of clear some of those things from a pulling standpoint. Again, you're going against, 5-star top 100 type players, high level players at IMG Academy every day. I always feel like those guys from IMG Academy, they always translate really well to the next level because it is like a small college at IMG. They just, their roster is always so stacked. So I think he's a good get for Florida. Obviously building the offensive line has been a big need. You look at just the recruiting over the last several classes for Florida at that offensive line position. They're making it a priority this cycle. So I think for Nigel Harris kind of starting off that haul that Florida hopes to land, come early signing day, national signing day, I think he's a really good prospect. And again, I can't say enough about just the fact that he's, a people mover. He's a guy that's going to clear that space from that interior part. He's got the footwork to get out in space, like I said. So, he's kind of what you would really want for those interior guys. You don't need him to be athletic in the sense of, kind of holding the edge and playing that offensive line spot. You just need a guy that, can move well enough and can really clear that space for that, what we think will be sort of a power run type of scheme that Billy Napier is going to want to run.
Blake, well, I hear IMG Academy, I immediately think, again, back to sort of that narrative that we had back in December when Florida was going after, I believe it was Kamari Wilson, and we're able to land him. That's a spot that produces a ton of talent. Well, produces, brings in, however you want to look at that. But obviously a super talented school, and Florida hadn't had a whole lot of success there. What do you think is sort of gone into the dynamic flip there, where it seems like not only is Florida having some success there, it's almost sort of becoming a hot spot for Florida?
It is, and that's the spot where if you want to get big time players out of the state of Florida, granted, I don't know what the number is, but I would say way more than, I'd say somewhere like 70%, 80% of that roster is from out of the state of Florida. So not only are they, a hot spot in the state of Florida that every school in the country wants to recruit, they bring in guys that don't have those ties to the state of Florida. So you really have to work hard and you have to court those guys heavily to get them to realize, staying in the state of Florida, what can offer and all those types of things. And, I think that whenever you had Billy Napier, who was going to make, kind of the state of Florida really like the battleground for him. You go in, you land a Kamari Wilson. I think he's kind of he's very outspoken. He's a very vocal person as far as recruiting guys. If you follow him on social media, you can see him, after every guy that, has committed IMG or visits, Florida from IMG, he's tweeting at him, he's posting at him, talking about, kind of continuing what he started as far as being that first person to sign with Florida from IMG Academy. So, it's a loaded roster every year. Florida's in play for a lot of guys. Will Norman, the 4-star defensive lineman, Jordan Hall, the 4-star linebacker. There's plenty of others, trust me, that are IMG Academy that Florida is trying to get on an official visit or has hosted already this season, or earlier in the spring part of the season there, that recruiting cycle. For Napier, I think it's just the fact that this staff is going to recruit so much heavier. And those guys at IMG Academy, I mean, they've got a who's of offers. They've got, big schools coming down. It's just such a hot spot, and it's such a battleground school because you have, schools like Alabama, Georgia. There's plenty of others that have had success there. So Florida's trying to kind of get that pipeline going there, having some of those guys on the roster that have played at IMG to be in the ears of other players. So, they're hoping to continue the success that they've already had there at IMG Academy. And that's one of the schools that whenever you look at, the state of Florida, as far as recruiting, that's one you circle to where you're going to make it a priority. And they've certainly done that.
Yeah. And I think your point about having guys that played there on the roster cannot be overlooked, because you look at what's going on sort of with NIL, with the transfer portal. There's been a lot of claims of tampering and stuff like that. Look, the reality is these kids talk to each other, right? And so if you have a guy that, say, for example, Lloyd Summerall, and, played at Lakeland, and, DeMarcus Bowman ends up at Clemson, but you're always going to have those conversations. And if Bowman's a guy that's considering, maybe getting back closer to home, he's got a line. He can just call a guy like Lloyd Summerall and say, hey, how's the program at Florida? That kind of stuff matters in recruiting. So I think it's really nice that Billy Napier has put an emphasis on IMG and that they've had some success. And we're starting to see the rest of the class begin to fill out, I think, kind of in the foundational stage. Let's stick with O-line, Blake. I know that Creed Whittemore is a wide receiver from Buchholz High School here in Gainesville who committed on the same day as Nigel Harris. But Florida recently added Bryce Lovett out of Rockledge, Florida. He's a 6'5", 330-pound type. Maybe not quite rated as highly yet. He checks in at number 729 overall. He's a 3-star prospect. But Blake, I know you, and particularly some of our Southeast recruiting analysts like Andrew Ivins, they really like this kid. So tell us a little bit about Bryce.
I saw him at the Under Armour camp down in Miami back in late part of February. He's athletic. He's got the length. I think that he's someone that you could see maybe start out at guard as you kind of get his feet wet more in the college level. But I think ultimately his future position is probably kicking him out to like the right tackle position. He has the athleticism. I don't think he has the super length of what you would want for a left tackle, but he has the footwork enough to where you can put him at the guard position and get him out in space, kind of like a Nigel Harris. I think he's ultimately, like I said, I think right tackle is where he's at. But I think one of the more impressive things is that the day he committed this past Monday, that was his 17th birthday. So he's fairly young for his class. So he's someone that, is going to maybe develop or maybe on a slower scale just from being a little bit younger there. So who knows if this guy's going to hit, an 18-year-old growth spurt, or, you never know how these guys pan out. But I always think that, when you've got someone on the younger side of their graduating class, that's something to keep in mind, just because you never know how they're going to develop out there. So that's something that I really like about him as well. But I think the versatility of being able to play guard and offensive tackle makes him a useful person for that college level, because those are the plug and play type of guys. If you have someone go down, you can put him in that position where you can pick and choose where you want to have him help you at. So I think he's someone that with some development in the college level, he's got a little bit of baby fat on him. Obviously that's something that, you kind of see with that, the high school level guys. I mean, those guys eat, double cheeseburgers and pizzas. And once they get into those, that college nutrition and you get in the strength program, I think his better years of football are ahead of him. And I think he was a really good get for Florida. And I think his better playing years are coming up ahead of him.
Blake, let's stick with the O-line a little bit, because that was a spot, obviously, in recruiting. Florida needed to land some guys in this class. And when you're trying to build a roster the way that Billy Napier and his staff want to build it, starting in the trenches, you've got to have the pieces there, right? We're looking at it, Bryce Lovett, ranked in the 700s, maybe a little bit underrated, possibly could be due for a bump later in the cycle. Nigel Harris, you've got 2 guys committed. I think a lot of people think that that's a pretty solid, at least middle of the O-line class. What does the top end of the class need to look like for you to start to feel comfortable that Florida has a group of 3, 4, maybe even 5 guys that it can feel comfortable building around going forward?
Well, I think you have to look at the guy that Florida's really made a priority, a guy like, 4-star offensive lineman Peyton Kirkland out of the Orlando area, from a guy that wasn't really high on the former coaching staff under Florida. That was a complete 180 once the new guys got in there. Darnell Stapleton and Rob Sale. I can't say enough good things about the impact that they've made on him and his mother. They're making sure to make him a priority. He's going to make his decision in the later part of July. So I think landing a guy that you really have put that much effort into, I think is where you see that, those upper tier type of guys that Florida wants to get in their class. And I think he's someone that can play across the board. He can play center, he can play guard, he can play left tackle. So I think that adding those quality types of players that, a true left tackle type player for the future. Not only that, but someone who's going to be a vocal leader as far as building your class or being a leader in the locker room whenever you get someone there. I think that that's someone that, again, Florida's made a big priority. And those are the types of guys that, that Florida fans want to see. They're used to seeing the top tier parts of the Florida's board, the targets they've gone after, go somewhere else. That's usually kind of how it will start out. They have their top tier part of the board. Those guys end up elsewhere. So Florida starts looking for plan Bs and plan Cs. And those are the guys that end up in the class. So getting someone like that, a Peyton Kirkland, I think would be kind of a lightning rod, and not only for their recruiting class, but for the future of their locker room. Another 4-star, Lucas Simmons, who I'm extremely high on, just from the fact that he's 6'7", 300 pounds. He's from Sweden. I believe he's played in the States for, I think this will either be his second or third year playing out here in St. Pete, Clearwater area. So he's very raw in a lot of areas, but he's extremely athletic for his size. A guy that's 6'7", 300 pounds that moves really well. That's a future left tackle. He's a gigantic human being. So I think that this is another guy that Florida went from kind of being on the outside looking into, I think maybe 2 months ago, he wasn't even sure if he was going to take an official visit to Florida. And now that's scheduled. It's on the books. They've done a really good job of recruiting him. So, guys like that, those true offensive tackles, if Florida can keep swinging for the fences at IMG Academy, there's a 5-star Francis Mauigoa, another guy who's from originally out west that Florida's gotten on campus a couple times. Like I said, they've continued to make IMG Academy a priority. Rob Sale is making them a priority. They've done Zoom calls with the family that lives out west still. So I think that adding some of those types of guys that have really been Florida's top tier, targets on their board, I would say that those are some of the highest guys on their board. So getting those guys in there, would be a really good success for Florida to pair with what they've already got.
Yeah, you mentioned Simmons. He's the guy that we've talked about on this podcast when it comes to the sort of the tweeting and the hashtags, where the whole staff has jumped in tweeting a hashtag, Hey Jai Gators, for Simmons. And obviously, it seems like, based on what you're telling us as far as getting an official locked in, really kind of entering the picture for him, maybe that stuff is effective. So we'll continue to see how that plays out. Blake, let's talk a little bit about Creed Whittemore here before we get into the second half of the show and talk recruiting more broadly. His brother Trent, obviously on campus at Florida as a receiver, probably starts in the slot this year, could have a big year. What does Creed bring to the table from an athletic standpoint?
Speed. He's a guy that, when you look at Florida's roster, they've got a lot of those bigger wide receivers, those guys that you can get in those 50-50 types of situations, but they really need to hit on not only let me back up, wide receiver position in general, whether you're a tall wide receiver, a slot wide receiver, whatever that may be, it's a priority for this coaching staff this cycle. But I think even more so, getting some more speed in there at that slot position is even more of a priority. And Creed has ripped off some really impressive 100-meter performances this spring. He had a 10.85 back in March, and then had 10.92. So, that's a guy that, even look at Trent Whittemore. That's just an athletic family. And you look at, not only is Creed a coach's son, he plays quarterback mainly on his high school team. His dad is the head coach there, but he's going to play wide receiver at the next level. He's just a gamer. He just puts up a boatload of stats every year. Buchholz has really turned into a team that makes those deep high school playoff runs, and the offense really does work through Creed. So I think whenever you have the speed there, I think that as far as the Whittemore family, I think Trent is more explosive as a player when you see those types of dunks and things that he rips off. But I think that Creed's got the speed. I looked him up at Friday Night Lights last year whenever Dan Mullen was the coach there. They actually offered him, I think it was the day or a couple days after Friday Night Lights. And he was just blowing past a lot of defenders. And Friday Night Lights usually brings in a lot of those, really good, high level defensive backs. So it's not like he was going out there and, ripping touchdowns off of guys like me that are unathletic and short. So I think he's a really deceptive player because he's not only fast, like I said, but he's also very smooth. So I'm really high on the addition of him. I think that, the more I've learned about him more in the spring and seeing those times that he's ripped off, he's become, a guy that I think is going to be a really good player in the future for Florida. They need to continue to add some other slot guys. I think if you pair a Creed Whittemore with a 4-star slot like Eugene Wilson out of the Tampa area, I think you've got two really productive players there and you're bringing a lot of speed into that roster. So, 24/7 as far as the composite and 24/7's rankings, Creed's a 4-star at 24/7. He's a top 247 player. Just the stats he puts up every year, the speed that he's been showing this spring. He's just a guy that's been climbing up, as far as the rankings here.
So 24/7 meaning that's our specific ranking.
Standalone rankings, yes.
The 24/7
composite is the average.
Right. So
he's
for
a
people that
3-star
don't
on the
know,
average. Right.
There you go.
And
so we're higher on him than the rest of the industry.
Correct.
Well, Blake, Florida now has these 4 commitments that it's taken since April, 5 if you include Aaron Gates. For me, and maybe we can wrap the first half of the show here. For me, it seems like they've got a lot of middle of the class types. Like these are not bad pieces at all. They're not head scratching takes, which is positive. But Florida will still need to land some of those elite pieces down the stretch. Is that a fair assessment?
It is.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap the first half of the show there, guys. When we come back on the other half of the show, we'll be talking about what needs to happen in recruiting going forward. As we noted, this is really just the beginning. We're about to get into the part of the year where a lot of these high-profile prospects are going to make their decisions or at least trim down their lists so that they have their official visits set, going into the fall, going into their senior seasons, and then they can begin to make decisions. And Billy Napier and his staff are in pretty good position for a lot of them. So right on the other side of this break, we'll get back and we'll talk some of that. Welcome back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Goldcamp, here with Blake Alderman. Blake, we're talking about 2023 recruiting, obviously. Florida's got 5 commitments right now. They sit at number 30 nationally in the rankings. And I think one of the big questions for a lot of fans, especially fans that follow recruiting very closely, is quarterback, right? Florida, the current roster is a little bit unsettled as far as quarterback. You obviously have Anthony Richardson, who I think a lot of people are very high on. Florida brought in Jack Miller as sort of a slightly more veteran option, but he's not very proven. Had a little bit of a tough go of it in the spring game. And then you've got freshmen, essentially. You've got redshirt freshman Jalen Kitna and then incoming signee Max Brown. There's a lot of question marks at quarterback, and I think typically when you have a new coach take over a program, that's one of the positions you look to start. That's kind of where you build your identity as a team based on the type of guy you recruit. And for people that have followed recruiting for a while, typically recruits that play quarterback tend to make their decisions a little bit earlier in the process than other positions. Now, having said that, there's a lot of first-year coaches around the country, so there are still several big-name, high-profile targets out there. Can you just kind of set the quarterback board for us at Florida right now? Who are the guys the Gators are looking at? What kind of traction do they have? And we'll go from there.
I think obviously Arch Manning is someone that Florida really wants to get some momentum going with. There was a report, from him coming out of his first high school practice this spring that he was going to look to visit Florida sometime in the summer. Or yes, in the summer. No dates have been set that I know of. At least I know that Florida is kind of behind the 8 ball as far as his recruitment because the schools like Texas, Alabama, and Georgia are really in a best spot for him. I think that when you look at Alabama, they're starting to trend for another 4-star quarterback that Florida's also involved with named Eli Holstein. He also visited Florida in the spring, but again, is looking to be trending Alabama. So I think if you start to take, if Holstein goes to Alabama, like everyone thinks, and obviously it becomes a 2-team race for Arch Manning, Texas and Georgia. So Florida really wants to get him on campus. I think the fact that he's from the New Orleans area, he's familiar with the fact that Billy Napier had success at Louisiana Lafayette. So that's in their back pocket there. The stability, obviously Billy Napier being a head coach is hands-on involved with quarterbacks. All those things are positives. But at this point, it's just about getting him on campus. You get him on campus in the summer, you shoot your shot, you see where things go from there. As far as that, things get a little bit more cloudy. I think Jaden Rashada, another 5-star quarterback out of the California area, is probably the next guy to keep an eye on for Florida. And that's someone that was offered under the former staff. had that offer reaffirmed from Billy Napier, but there's some ties in there because Rashada's dad was a player at Arizona State, was a big time player there. Obviously, Billy Napier and a couple other coaches there have some ties to Arizona State from their time there. So I think the fact that that's there, Billy Napier has been communicating with Rashada's father. He's going to make his decision on June 18th. Recently released the top 7 list of schools. Florida was in there, and they've been on record as saying that Florida's really pulling out all the stops, are really pushing really hard. So I think you're starting to see where Florida's getting that narrowed down board. Like I said, you've got to play catch up for an Arch Manning. Eli Holstein is starting to trend towards Alabama. Past that, there's not really a lot of guys that Florida's involved with. So Jaden Rashada is a guy that Florida really wants to take an official visit with. According to his dad, he told Jacob Redner earlier this week that he was going to take that official visit to Florida. No dates have been, lined up as far as we know at this point, but there are talks of getting him on campus for that official visit. So Florida could really get him on campus, in June, closer to the part of, where he's starting to make that decision. Ole Miss is involved there. Oregon's involved there. LSU and A&M to an extent are involved there. So Florida's really got a chance to go in there and make a big impression. Get him in as far as, showing him the quarterback room. And like you said, there's really not a lot of proven players there. So, you bring in a 5-star quarterback like that, you've got a chance to come in and really make some noise, as far as, coming in and buying in and, learning the offense really well. So I think that is something that's intriguing to them. So we'll see, past that, it's just kind of hard to really pencil somebody in as Florida's in a really good spot for them at this point, because it's kind of remained to be seen with guys like Rashada and Manning. And then past that, you've got Eli Holstein, who you have hosted on campus, but does seem to be trending towards Alabama. A guy like, Dante Moore was another 5-star quarterback. Seems like things have kind of fallen off between him and Florida. So past that, there just really aren't any other targets that Florida's actively recruiting. I don't think that at this point that I would see them, if they miss on, a Manning or Rashada and Eli Holstein, I don't really see them starting to offer other guys unless there's someone that they just fall in love with, through, watching more tape. So I would think that if Florida doesn't land any of those guys that they've already offered, I think you're going to see them start to look more towards the transfer portal for a quarterback. I don't see them really, unless, like I said, something crazy happens, they fall in love with someone's tape that's maybe a late riser. I don't think that Florida's going to, if they miss on the guys at the high school level that they're recruiting, I think you'll see them start to turn towards the transfer portal. So that's kind of where I'm at with recruiting right now at that quarterback spot.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's a bad idea, to be honest with you. I mean, like we talked about the makeup of this roster, Anthony Richardson, I'd be a little surprised if he has a good enough year to come out after this year, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility, right? And even if, I'd expect him to have a good enough year that we're definitely talking about him after 2023 as a high-profile NFL draft prospect. So at best, you've got 2 years of Richardson. So if you don't land a high school quarterback here, maybe you are best served by getting a guy that has a little bit more experience out of the transfer portal. And if this offseason has taught us anything, man, it's not hard to get a quality quarterback from the portal, or at least there's plenty of options out there. So interesting on that front. Blake, what are some of the other maybe positions of major need that Florida's focusing on right now?
I touched on the wide receiver position. I think that adding some speed in that room is something really important for Florida. Offensive line is obviously a big position for any school. Florida needs help in the trenches as far as from the interior part to the, to the offensive tackle position. I think the running back room is good. They are looking like they're going to try to at least take 2 running backs this cycle. I think it kind of depends on who some of the guys are. Trayon Webb is a 4-star running back out of the Jacksonville area. He's the cousin of former Gator D Webb. So he's going to make his decision on June 30th. He's going to take that official visit to Florida the first weekend of June. So that's someone that I think Florida's in a really good spot with. But I think they also would like to pair him with someone, wide receiver, like I said, offensive line. Defensive line is obviously a big position for Florida because they need to add some of those beefy guys on the inside of the, 3 technique interior part of their defensive line. So I think that that's an important position. Cornerback does seem to be one that Florida's really trying to go for, like the top tier type of guys, a 5-star Cormani McClain, a 5-star AJ Harris, another 5-star Tony Mitchell. So those guys, I think the cornerback position is important for Florida in the fact that they can land some really good players this cycle. If you can land, 2 out of the 3, I think that's an extreme win for Florida. So I would say that the big 3 positions for Florida as far as a need are wide receiver, defensive line, and offensive line. But I think that's kind of a copy and paste, thing that you could use every year for any school, because, especially in the SEC, the trenches is where you got to take care of first. But I think even more so for Florida, adding some speed at the pass catch position is something that they've really lacked over the last couple of years. So, the only guy that really jumps out to me as, a speedy guy was Kadarius Toney, but even he wasn't like a track blazer type of guy. He was one of those elusive, make you miss, he can throw on the tape and, so I think that adding some of those guys like, Creed Whittemore, like I said, who has some speed, adding a guy like Aiden Mizell, who's another legacy player. Both of his parents ran track at Florida. And he also runs track himself. So he's got some speed. So, Eugene Wilson, another guy I mentioned earlier, if you add those three guys to your wide receiver room, you've added three guys that are, high level track guys. Creed put up those numbers. Like I said, Eugene Wilson had the second fastest 40-yard dash time, ran like a 4.3, a low 4.3 at the Under Armour Miami camp. And then you've got Aiden Mizell, who was competed in the state track tournament that just took place earlier this month. So you've got three guys that are bringing some speed. So that would be a really good haul for Florida.
Yeah. Speaking of Mizell, I just looked up on my Twitter feed, and he's announcing his top 7 tomorrow. So we'll have that on the site. I think Florida certainly.
I think they have a good shot of making that.
Yeah, I would say so. So, Blake, I heard 5-star cornerback, and all I could think of was Corey Raymond. That seems to be sort of the spot, the secondary, where Florida has the most potential to maybe pile up some of these 5-stars. Are there other 5-stars? I know you mentioned the 2 quarterbacks, obviously, Arch Manning and Jaden Rashada. Are there any other 5-star types that Florida is sort of in the mix for that even the casual fans should know about?
I mentioned Francis Maui-Goa. He's one that I think that is probably more so, probably the one to keep an eye on. They're recruiting, 5-star running back Richard Young. He's already pretty much set up all of his 5 official visits unless something changes there, and Florida's not going to get one of those. They have hosted him on campus a couple times. I'm actually trying to scroll now just to make sure I'm not missing anybody at that 5-star position. I kind of put you on the spot there. But I mean, nobody really jumps off the top of my head as far as 5-star guys that Florida's really heavily in the mix for, other than those cornerbacks.
And they have a good shot with those guys, we think.
Yeah, I mean, Samuel Mpemba is a guy that they're looking at the edge rusher position. I don't know that he's really someone, that I would really put on as the odds-on favorite for Florida right now. Keon Keeley, a 5-star edge rusher who's committed to Notre Dame. Florida's still kicking the tires on him. They got him on campus. I believe it was the first weekend right there out of March. And he's not against taking official visits or any kind of visits in general, because the fact that, he's committed to Notre Dame, and he's, guys that attend that Berkeley prep school, they're really tight-lipped on, their recruitment if they're going to continue to keep doors open. But I mean, he's visited Notre Dame a couple times, continues to talk highly as far as being solid there. But he's visited Ohio State. He's visited Florida. I want to say there's another school that he's visited too, but I can't remember. Oh, Alabama was the other school that he visited as well. So that's someone to keep an eye on. 5-star Peter Woods, the defensive lineman out of the state of Alabama. Florida's in the top 4 for him. I think Alabama has a good shot of keeping him back home. He's a former Alabama commit that opened things back up, but he'll take an official visit to Florida. And then 5-star Vic Burley is a defensive lineman who's still fairly open with the recruiting process. He's got 12 schools that he's looking at. Florida's, got him on campus before. He's coached by a former Gator. So I think that I think as far as his interest in schools, I think Florida's on the higher end of that. I don't know if they're the odds on favorite for him, but they're certainly in a punching distance for him. So I think he'll take an official visit to Florida at some point when he gets around to that. So those are some of the guys that I would say to keep an eye on as far as, just general fans keeping an eye on 5-star guys that Florida's involved with.
Okay, Blake. Well, let's wrap up here. What are maybe the dates, I guess, as far as visits go, that Florida fans should maybe have circled in terms of, okay, the Gators have a bunch of high-profile targets coming this weekend. You need to be on Swamp 24/7 for this weekend.
Yeah, I think the first weekend of June 3rd, there's not really, a buku amount of, star power there, but I think the fact they've already got 8 guys set to visit that weekend, so that one's looking like a really big weekend for Florida. I think the headliner of that group is a top 100 wide receiver, another kind of slot guy, Jonte Cook, who I think that Florida has some ground to make up over schools out of like Texas and Texas A&M up there in the area where he's from. But Joe Hamilton is a guy on Florida staff that's got a lot of ties to the state of Texas. Texas. Kerry Colbert was recruiting Cook whenever he was over at USC. So that relationship continued to carry over. So, I think that weekend is really kind of setting up to be, a big weekend for Florida as far as numbers. But that June 10th weekend for Florida is really looking like some dudes are coming in. You've got a top 100 linebacker, Malik Bryant, who's going to make his decision on July 23rd. Lucas Simmons, the big giant offensive lineman that I mentioned earlier that I'm really high on. Eugene Wilson, a guy that's had Florida leading for a long time, and one of those slot guys, speedy guys, like I said. A new name that I confirmed earlier this afternoon, TJ Searchie, who's an edge rusher type of guy, was recruited by Mike Peterson all the way back to whenever he was at South Carolina. And then Peyton Kirkland, one of Florida's top offensive line targets. So, you've got 5 guys right there that are, top 247 4-star players. So I think that's looking like maybe the biggest weekend as far as maybe not from a number standpoint of guys coming in that weekend, but that one's looking like where the star power is coming in.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we will preview those as things continue to develop over the next month or so before we get there. But Blake, thank you so much for the great recruiting recap. As we noted, Florida has added 3 commitments in the last 2 weeks or so. And obviously, we're heading into that time of year where, coaches are out visiting for spring practices. They're getting evals on guys. And, a lot of things are fluid right now. So be sure to stay tuned to swamp247.com. Blake's got you covered. Our new hire, Jacob Rudner, has you covered. He's been doing a fantastic job covering everything from football recruiting to football. I mentioned he's going to be meeting with Billy Napier tonight down in Fort Lauderdale, so he'll have content on the site from that. So be sure to check it out. And as always, Blake, thanks again for the recruiting update. If you want to follow Blake's updates and Jacob's updates, swamp247.com, that's the place to be. We will have it all for you as the Florida 2023 recruiting class continues to take shape. But for today, that'll do it, guys. Thank you for tuning in.